Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Monday, Yom Sheni. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Monday? Yehud in South Carolina, Joe in the Inland Empire, Shandor in the Bronx, Bill in mid-Missouri, Lucy in Minnesota, Bella in Florida, Guy in Ohio, Lorraine in Texas, Sharon in New Jersey, Jonathan in LA, Michelle in South Florida, Frank in San Pedro, Marjorie in Georgia, Spencer in Connecticut, Ella in Southern California, Franco in Italy, pretty sure, and Nina wishing Franco speedy recovery. Amen. May you have a refuah shlema. We're here in LA, and fires are still burning. They're hardly contained. The one in the Eaton fire near Pasadena, a little bit more contained than the Palisades fire. I met today with a friend who lost his house in the Palisades, and he was so inspiring. He was just really keeping his spirits up and just saying, he's just happy to be alive. He's happy that his whole family is safe, that this world isn't about material possessions. Just a really beautiful attitude in the face of adversity. We should all be inspired by that. And I dedicate our learning tonight again for the safety of everyone in harm's way, for the healing of those who are injured, for the strength and safety of the responders who are headed to those fires. And please God, may these fires end soon. We say Amen. Reminder, I'm going to Miami tomorrow. Guns N' Moses is playing in the Miami Jewish Film Festival. Screenings are Wednesday, which I think is sold out, and Thursday night, which seats are I'm pretty sure still available in Miami Jewish Film Festival website. Would love to see you there. Because of that, no class for the rest of the week, and we will resume AT Daily with the next page here in Tractate Sanhedrin on Saturday night. God willing, I should be back here on Friday, though not in time to teach, and then we'll resume the class next Saturday night. Okay, our daf today is page 26 here in Tractate Sanhedrin, the 24th volume of the Talmud, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 3. Here in chapter 3, Mishnah number 3, here in chapter 3, and discussing witnesses that are disqualified from giving witness testimony before a rabbinic court, before a beis din, because they are suspected of being dishonest, given their history and practice of engaging in forbidden practices. Either they're Jews who are lending money to other Jews for interest, and even Jews who borrow money from Jews from other Jews at interest, as well as professional gamblers for reasons that we have discussed, people who trade, who buy and sell produce, during the Shemitah year, the sabbatical year, when people are allowed to eat that, but not to buy and sell it, and especially not to plant in their fields. We no longer observe this law, though some do. There are people observing the Shemitah year in the land of Israel. But when the temple is standing, doesn't have the same force of law. Because we don't have, the sixth year is producing so much that people don't need to plant in the seventh year, when the spiritual level of the nation was that high. It was really beautiful. There was so much produce in the sixth year that the farmers didn't have to work in the seventh year, and there was enough to eat for everybody. And what were they doing in that sabbatical year? Not just sipping Mai Tais on the beach. Now they were free to learn and teach Torah and, build up their spirituality and Torah learning even more, which was a real blessing. Okay, let's continue. We are about a quarter, maybe a fifth of the way down, page 26a. The Gemara recounts an incident that is connected only tangentially to the discussion that we started about the sabbatical year. Now that we've mentioned the sabbatical year, we hear about this incident. It's not so much about witnesses being disqualified. Now, Rabbi Chia bar Zarnoke and Rabbi Shimon ben Yehotzadak were going to intercalate the year in Asya, right? So deciding, along with a court, whether or not to add a second month of Adar and make it a leap year in the Hebrew calendar, which receives the extra month of Adar, which, as we've heard, should only be done in the land of Israel and where the Sanhedrin meets in Israel. But during times of persecution, that wasn't always possible. So in this case, circumstances did not enable them to perform the intercalation of the year within the land of Israel. And so they were going to this place outside of Israel called Asya. Now, Reish Lakish, the great sage Reish Lakish, met them and joined with them. And he said, I will go see how they do the deed, i.e. how the intercalation is performed practically, because he hadn't been a member of a court that does the intercalation before. Reish Lakish saw a certain man plowing a field. And he said to the other sages, look at this priest, a Cohen, who is plowing during the sabbatical year. This is not permitted. And they said to him, well, he could say in his own defense, I am a hired worker, an agiston, in the field, and it belongs to a non-Jew. Therefore, it is permitted. He's not plowing in the field owned by a Jew where plowing is prohibited during the sabbatical year. He's just working as a hired worker for a non-Jew that owns that field, and that would be permitted. Reish Lakish, walking along with these sages, further saw a certain man who was pruning vines in the vineyards. And he said to the other sages, look at this priest, this Cohen, who was pruning vines during the sabbatical year, also prohibited. And they said to him, well, this man could say, I need the branches to make a bale, like a bale of hay, here translating the word ekel, for my olive press, i.e. a basket to hold olives for pressing. So he's not pruning the vines in order so that they should produce more grapes during the sabbatical year, which would be prohibited. Rather, he's just cutting some branches that he needs in order to work his olive press, and that would be permitted. Olives that were harvested during the 6th year could be pressed even during the sabbatical year. So he's just pruning some branches to use as part of that process. Since he is not pruning the vines for agricultural purposes, but rather to use the branches, it would be permitted to do this in the sabbatical year. And Reish Lakish said to them, in a play on words, the heart knows whether he is doing so for an ekel, a bale, or whether he is doing this or saying this as deceit, le'kalkalot, right? So, in a little bit of a rhyming pun, is he doing this for what's permitted, or is he doing this just as a ruse in order to violate the law and profit for himself in a prohibited manner during the sabbatical year? Now, the Gemara asks about this incident. So, which did Reish Lakish say to these other sages first? Which incident occurred first? If we say that first he said to them that the first exclamation, if we say that the first thing he said to them was what is listed here first in the Gemara, that a priest was plowing in the field, well, let them say to him in this latter incident also, in which someone was pruning vines, that the same defense. I am a hired worker in the field. This would have been a better justification than claiming that he needed the branches for his olive press. So rather, apparently, first he said to them this exclamation that a priest was pruning vines, and only then he said to them that a priest was plowing the field. Based on the logic of what we've heard, it seems like the two things that he saw should have been reversed in order. So the Gemara asks, what is different about a Cohen? What is different about a priest? Why did Reish Lakish assume that this man who seems to be doing prohibited labor during the Shemitah year, during the sabbatical year, why did he assume that he was a Cohen, that he was a priest? And the Gemara answers, it is because Kohanim, priests, are suspected of desecrating the sabbatical year. So, already you see how far the nation has fallen in this period. Now, when are we talking about Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan? This is, pretty fairly long time after the fall of the Second Temple. And yet they were still observing the sabbatical year. And during that period, you have this, but the priests are not serving in the temple since the temple has been destroyed. And, the fact that Reish Lakish would say, that the average priest is suspected of violating the sabbatical year. We would think that the average priest should be somebody who holds himself to a higher standard than the average people. Why would we assume that he's even lower standard? That we assume he is, that they are generally suspected of desecrating the sabbatical year. Why? As we learned in a Baraisa, a sa, that's a volume of terumah, right? So terumah is the first tithe, not called the first tithe, but it's the first part of the tithing process, the 2% of produce that is given to a Kohen. And only a Kohen can eat it, and he must eat it where both he and the terumah, this produce that's set aside for him, are in a state of ritual purity, are tahor. So a sa of terumah, meaning the portion of the produce designated for the priest that fell into 100 sa of sabbatical year produce and was indistinguishable, is nullified. Okay, so in other words, terumah can only be eaten by a priest. If terumah gets mixed in with regular food, and we're not sure, we can't distinguish, like a certain quantity of terumah fell in, let's say, of wheat, harvested wheat. So there's a pile of wheat, and this pile we know is terumah, and somehow it got mixed up with another pile of wheat that's not terumah. It's just chulin. It's just regular terumah that can be bought and sold. Then we're going to have a problem because the terumah can only be eaten by a priest. And that means that whole pile, which is now mixed up with the terumah, is going to be, and we can't separate them, is going to be prohibited for regular people. Okay, but maybe it could be eaten at least by priests. Now we have an additional wrinkle to that idea. Sabbatical year produce. Okay, well, sabbatical year produce that wasn't harvested, that wasn't sowed and harvested. In other words, it's just what was growing wild during the sabbatical year. Okay, you can take that for yourself and eat it. But now if terumah gets mixed up in it, we're going to have the same problem. It's going to be prohibited for people who are not priests. But what they're saying is if a sa of terumah gets mixed up with 100 sa of sabbatical year produce, then in that mixture of 100 to 1, we're going to say there's so little terumah in it that it's as if the terumah is nullified, and okay, people can continue eating it who are not priests. Okay, so it's nullified. But that tells you 1 in 100 is nullified, but 1 in 90 is not. So still a very small amount of terumah could render a very large amount of sabbatical year produce prohibited for anyone who's not a priest. Right, if it fell into a lesser quantity of sabbatical year produce, the entire mixture must be left to rot, as it is prohibited for non-priests to partake of terumah. I don't know why priests can't eat it, but certainly non-priests cannot. And if you can't, I guess, find enough priests to give it to, you have to leave it to rot. And we discussed it. Why must the produce rot? Let its owner sell it to a priest in accordance with its value as terumah, which is less expensive than regular produce because it can be eaten only by priests, and except for the value of that sa of terumah that fell in, which the owner would have to give to a priest for free, right? So in other words, let's just say that 1 sa of terumah fell into 20 sa of produce that's owned by someone. Okay, so now that it's mixed up with terumah, it can't be eaten by non-priests. But okay, assess it at the value of terumah, which is worth less than regular produce since only priests can eat it. And at that level of value, whatever terumah is, per ounce, sell it to a priest. So at least he can eat it and deduct from that the actual 1 sa of terumah, because that should have been given to the priest for free. But now, if a priest wants it, he can buy it for this reduced price and get a lot of it. Though only priests can eat it. Keep remembering that. So why not sell it to a priest at the price level of terumah? Now that you've got this mixture, that it's not a small enough amount of terumah in the larger amount of produce to nullify it. So we assume it's like the whole pile that has the value of terumah. Why can't you sell it to a priest? Why must it be left to rot? And Rav Chia said in the name of Ula, that is to say, i.e. one can infer from the fact that one is not permitted to sell the mixture to a priest, that priests are suspected of desecrating the sabbatical year by partaking of its produce after the time it must be removed from one's possession. And they did so because they considered it theirs, the same as terumah, as both mitzvahs pertain to the produce of Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, produce of the sabbatical year should not be given or sold to priests. And similarly, Reish Lakish assumed that those who desecrated the sabbatical year were priests. Now, what they're saying here is, during a sabbatical year, this produce that you can, just go out and find growing wild, right? You weren't allowed to plant seeds and harvest them during the sabbatical year, but produce that grew wild could be gathered and eaten. But only up to a certain time in the year. When I think it was when the people who have stored that have run out of it. Is there an explanation here? Yeah, they didn't explain it here. We encountered this before. I'm sorry, I didn't have enough time today to go look this up. But it's suffice to say that there is a time during the sabbatical year when sort of each species of wild food that's growing out there in the fields, you can't eat it anymore, right? After that, and they proclaim when that is, and then you can't eat it anymore. But the priests kept eating it because they said, well, we can eat our terumah all year. So the sabbatical year produce is like our terumah. They thought they were above the law in certain areas of the law. Not every area of the law, but it's almost like the priests were making a mistake and too many of them were making it. They were, fudging the law a little bit in this one area. And so we would say that priests are suspected of eating sabbatical year produce after the date on which that particular kind of produce is no longer permitted to be eaten. Priests would still do it. And Reish Lakish continually bothered them with his comments, these two sages that he was walking with on the way toward intercalating the calendar. Right? He kept bothering them with his comments. And Rabbi Chia bar Zarnoke and Rabbi Shimon ben Yehotzadak said, this one, Reish Lakish, is a nuisance. And in order to rid themselves of him, when they reached the location where they intended to intercalate the year, they went up to the roof and they took the ladder out from under them so that Reish Lakish would stay below and would not be able to join them. He was like too punctilious with the rules and they had their mind on other things. They didn't want to deal with him anymore. Sometime later, Reish Lakish came before Rabbi Yochanan. Originally Rabbi Yochanan was the one who, Makar of Reish Lakish. It was Makar of Reish Lakish, meaning that Rabbi Yochanan was already a sage when he met Reish Lakish, who at that time was not only not religious, he was leading a very morally questionable life as a bandit. But somehow Rabbi Yochanan saw in him the potential to not only become a righteous Jew, but even a great sage. And he brought him under the wings of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence, and of Torah, and educated him. And indeed, Reish Lakish came to greatness, one of the great sages in our history. Okay, so Reish Lakish now came before Rabbi Yochanan and said to him, are people who are suspected of desecrating the sabbatical year fit to intercalate the year? He believed that the two sages who were sent to intercalate the year treated the sanctity of the sabbatical year with disrespect. Why do you think that? Because when he was talking about, these people that they were walking by, that he said, I think that those guys are treating the laws of the sabbatical year with disrespect. These two sages that he was walking with didn't want to hear it. They weren't interested in it. So he said, maybe they are a little bit susceptible, or maybe they're a little bit vulnerable in this area because they're fudging the law. And then Reish Lakish said in response to his own question, this is not difficult for me, just as the sages once intercalated the year in accordance with the assessment of 3 cattle herders. We saw that on page 18b. And it was permitted, as the sages depended not on the assessment of the cattle herders about whether, the year, the conditions in the year required them to add a second month of Adar, but rather on their own astronomical calculations, and then they said, and we know we got it right because these guys are saying that the signs that the sort of common people look at for when it's Adar and when it's still and when it's actually Nisan supports the calculations we've made. So too here, the sages depended on their own calculations in intercalating the year, and not on the decision of these two guys, Rabbi Chia Zarnoke and Rabbi Shimon ben Yehotzodak, who Reish Lakish found questionable to be the level of sages who should be intercalating the year, and thus affecting, everything throughout the Jewish world, right? Because when the sages in Israel, who are part of that court that intercalate the year, say, we declare that there's going to be a second Adar, okay, so then the whole Jewish world is going to bring the Passover sacrifice, observe Passover 1 month later. And if the people who were doing the intercalation were not righteous, knowledgeable people who were doing it correctly, then it's like the whole nation would be sinning by bringing the Passover late. So what he's saying here is, well, even if these two guys were questionable, the rest of the sages of that court were surely knowledgeable and righteous enough, and these two guys wouldn't affect that decision. But then Reish Lakish changed his mind, and he said, actually, this is not similar. There, in the case of the sages who relied on the cattle herders and their folk wisdom about the time of year, well, afterward, the sages were counted. They made a decision and they intercalated that year themselves. The ones who actually made the decision were not the cattle herders. It was a bunch of knowledgeable and righteous sages. But here, by contrast, it is a conspiracy of wicked people, as the sages who intercalated the year included these two guys who, as far as Reish Lakish are concerned, are wicked people. And therefore, it was not a complete court that intercalated the year. And Rabbi Yochanan said, this problem that you raise is troublesome. When Rabbi Chia bar Zarnoke and Rabbi Shimon ben Yehotzadak subsequently came before Rabbi Yochanan, after hearing about his discussion with Reish Lakish, perhaps they were summoned to be examined, they said to Rabbi Yochanan bitterly, Reish Lakish referred to us as cattle herders, and the master said nothing to him in response. They were bitterly, deeply offended. And Rabbi Yochanan said to them dismissively, no, and even if he had referred to you as shepherds, who are disqualified from bearing witness, in addition to being disqualified from serving as judges, what should I have said to him? Meaning, Rabbi Yochanan agreed with Reish Lakish's assessment of the faulty reputation of those two sages. That's where that story ends. Now let's get back to the subject of who is qualified to bear witness in a Beis Din. So the Gemara asks, what is the source of the law that a conspiracy of wicked people... we're going on we're examining this issue that was brought up here during that story. What is the source of the law that a conspiracy of wicked people is not counted as part of a group? And the Gemara answers Shevna, who was a steward and minister in the court of King Hizkiah. And he was a prominent and influential figure. and he would teach Torah to an audience of 130,000 followers, whereas King Hezekiah, who was a very righteous king, but whose reign was very late in the first temple period, when the level of the nation had fallen dangerously low, and that's why ultimately the temple would fall. But he was teaching Torah, and Hezekiah would teach to 110,000 followers. So this guy Shevna had, more followers. This is like a social media comparison. He had more followers than the king. So Shevna, very influential. When Sennacherib came and besieged Jerusalem, Shevna wrote a note and shot it over the wall with an arrow. And it read, Shevna and his camp have appeased Sennacherib and are ready to surrender. And Hezekiah and his camp have not appeased Sennacherib. As it is stated in allusion to this incident, for behold, the wicked bend the bow, like a bow and arrow. They have made ready their arrow upon the string. That is Psalm 11, verse 2. Okay, so picture this. This is not when the temple fell. This isn't Nebuchadnezzar. This was another king, Sennacherib, who was not successful when he attacked Jerusalem. But while he was besieging the city, everyone inside the city was freaking out. They were terrified that this man was going to come in and kill everybody. Right? So under that kind of pressure, you have the faithful who are loyal to King Hezekiah and who are relying on God to save them, and whatever the leadership and wisdom and might perhaps of King Hezekiah. And then you have the other camp who are like, yeah, we're going to die. We need to break ranks and tell the enemy, hey, don't kill us. We're with you. We're with you. Right? Betraying the king, betraying their fellow Jews, betraying their fellows in the city out of fear. Okay, they're human, but this is considered very wicked conduct. Hezekiah was afraid. He said, perhaps, God forbid, the opinion of the Holy One, blessed be he, will follow the majority. And since the majority have submitted to the Assyrians, led by Sennacherib, even those who have not submitted will also be submitted into their hands, right? Since this Shevna had more followers than Hezekiah, he thought, well, perhaps since the majority, have lost faith, perhaps God is going to deliver all of us into the hands of the enemy. The prophet Isaiah was present at this time and came and said to the king, quote, say not a conspiracy concerning all of which this people say a conspiracy. Meaning, it is a conspiracy of wicked people, and a conspiracy of wicked people is not counted. The fact that Shevna has 130,000 followers doesn't mean anything because he's wicked and he's leading those people in wickedness. So we're not going to say that the majority of the people have fallen into wickedness because those people don't even count. The only thing that counts is the people who remain faithful. What happened? Shevna went out to carve out a grave for himself among the graves of the house of David. Now, this sounds like Shevna's giving up and he thinks everyone's going to die. That's not what's happening. For whatever reason, Shevna thought what's going to happen here is since I'm leading the majority of the people, into the hands of Sennacherib, he's going to reward me and sort of like make me a vassal king of Israel, and I'm going to replace Hezekiah, who's being so foolish. And so he's already sort of, staking out real estate for himself in the royal cemetery. That's what Shevna's doing. He wants to carve out a spot for him in the royal cemetery among the graves of the house of David, because he thought that the kingship would be given to him. And the prophet Isaiah then came and said to him, quote, what have you here? And whom have you here that you have carved out a grave for yourself here? You who have carved yourself out a grave on high and hollowed a habitation for yourself in the rock, behold, the Lord will make you wander like the wandering of a man, and he will wind you round and round. Pretty poetic way to say by the prophet Isaiah, you are way off, pal, and you are going to be destroyed. And so the Gemara mentions tangentially, Rav says that the wandering of a man, now that Isaiah said you're going to be wandering, the wandering of a man. What is the wandering of a man? So Rav says that the wandering of a man is more difficult than that of a woman, and he derives it from the expression like the wandering of a man. And what he meant by that is that when a man is broken homeless, it's worse than when a woman is broken homeless. Because when a woman is broken homeless, people take pity on her, and try to help her out, give her a place to live and to what to eat, etc. But when a man is in that situation, he doesn't arouse the same pity that a woman would. So that's the wandering of a man. Now, with regard to the phrase that Isaiah said, and he will wind you round and round, Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Hanina, says this teaches that Shevna developed tsaras. Right? Tsaras we talked about many times. A person who develops tsaras is known as a mitzora, and a mitzora, it's a condition that no longer exists now, but in biblical times, it was a physical expression of a spiritual malady, often associated with lashon hara, somebody who has an evil tongue, who speaks gossip or slander, or in other manners uses his tongue in a wicked way, will develop these white spots on his skin, and he's going to have to go through a purification process before that will go away. That person is known as a mitzora. It's not some kind of physical disease. It's often translated as leprosy, but it's not leprosy like the disease where your limbs fall off. It's not that, right? It's tsaras. It's its own unique thing, and it no longer exists. It was a way to warn people when already their spiritual level was higher than it is now, that they were off the spiritual path and that they better get back on it. Now it's like we're all so far away from that level that God doesn't even bother striking us with tsaras. Okay, so about that, Rabbi Hanina says this teaches that Shevna developed tsaras. It is written here, quote, and he will wind you round and round. That's ve'otcha ato. And it is written there in the Torah with regard to the Mitzorah, and the Mitzorah in whom this plague is, his clothes shall be torn, and the hair of his head shall go loose, and he shall cover his upper lip, yateh, Leviticus 13:45. So the Hebrew word for upper lip has the same root as the verb in the verse cited from Isaiah, wind and wind. So the Gemara continues to interpret this prophecy about Shevna. He will violently roll and toss you like a ball into a large country where you shall die. And there shall be the chariots of your glory, you shame of your Lord's house. Isaiah strongly said to Shevna, you are cursed, you are a disgrace in the house of Israel. And the Baraisa taught that he, Shevna, desired shame for his master's house. Therefore, his glory turned to shame. And this is what happened to him. When he was going out of the gate of Jerusalem to submit to Sennacherib and the Assyrians, saying, okay, we give up, you're mightier than us, along with his followers, he thought, the angel Gabriel, came and held the gate in front of his camp, so they could not follow him. And consequently, he went out by himself. Right? He thought that he was leading the majority of people in Jerusalem who were following him and giving up to Sennacherib because he thought that would save them. But when he went out of the gate closed behind them, and it was just him by himself in front of the Assyrian army. Now we're on page 26b. And the Assyrians said to him, where is your camp that you said you were going to bring out and you were all going to surrender to us? And Shevna said, they backed out on me. That sounds so modern. That's exactly how it's written here. They backed out on me. So the Assyrians said to him, Well, if so, you are mocking us. You led us to believe that behind you stands a large camp of supporters. So what did the Assyrians do? They punched holes in his heels, and they hung him by the tails of their horses, and dragged him on the thorns and on the bristles. They tortured him to death. Rabbi Lazar says that Shevna was a hedonist, right? One who is, there's multiple interpretations here. So one is that he's addicted to pleasure, or one is that he's associated with pleasure or with benefit. But here it says a hedonist. So it is written here, go get yourself to this steward, Hasoken, to Shevna, who is over the house, Isaiah 22:15. It is written there with regard to Abishag, the young woman who was brought in to comfort King David in his old age when he couldn't get warm, and let her be a companion, sokenet, to him, and let her lie in your bosom, that my lord the king may get heat. And following the aforementioned verse, for behold, the wicked bend the bow, they have made ready their arrow upon the string. And the next verse states, this is Psalm 11:3, Psalm 11, verse 3. When the foundations are destroyed, what has the righteous one done? Now, this is an interesting translation because if you look, this is a beautiful edition of Tehillim, of Psalms, interlinear translation. So we look at Psalm 11, verse 3. Right, so when the foundations are destroyed, ki chashatot yeharesun tzadik ma pa'al. Right, so here it's translated as when the foundations are destroyed, the righteous man, what has he accomplished? So Rabbi Raphael Shimshon Hirsch interprets this as, people struggle to understand in this world why the wicked prosper and the righteous suffer. So when we see that, a synagogue is destroyed, or, when these people would see the temple, the holy temple destroyed, then a righteous person who has spent his life living righteously will say, like, well, what did I accomplish living righteously if the righteous are destroyed in this world, if the righteous suffer in this world, if the holy temple is destroyed, what did I accomplish by living a righteous life? And of course, the answer is that, but it's not about this world, right? We have mortal, finite, very, very short lives. Even if we live to 120 years of old, 20 years of age, that's a spark compared to the eternal soul. We can't understand why the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper in this world. We don't know. We can't understand it. But the soul, according to your actions in this world, and if you're a righteous person in this world, well, you build for yourself a portion in the world to come, in the world of souls, where there's a very exact accounting of all our righteous deeds rewarded and our transgressions, held accountable. That's for another day. But here in the Gemara that we're reading now, it's translated not as what has the righteous person accomplished, but rather, if the temple is destroyed, what has the righteous one, meaning God, accomplished? In other words, what is God doing destroying the temple is one way to interpret that verse. So now we're going to interpret it a little bit longer. Okay, the next verse states, when the foundations are destroyed, what has the righteous one done? So Rav Yehuda and Rav Eina interpret this verse. One says, if Hizkiah and his camp are destroyed, who are the righteous people, what has the righteous one done? Why would God allow the righteous to be destroyed? Because the wicked ones wanted to give up. And the other interpretation is, if the temple should be destroyed, what has the righteous one done? And Ula says, if the intentions of that wicked person, Sennacherib, who came to destroy Jerusalem, are not destroyed, what has the righteous one done? Now, in the context of that story, These are wonderful questions to ask because Sennacherib was destroyed, right? I think that's the story where there was a plague, and the threat went away. The temple was not destroyed. They lived. They all survived another day, and it was the wicked ones, Shevna, from among the Jews, and Sennacherib, who was besieging Jerusalem. They were destroyed. Let's keep reading. Now the Gemara asks, granted that according to the one who says that the verse means if the intentions of wicked Sennacherib are not destroyed, what has the righteous one done? This is the reason that it is written when the foundations are destroyed. Foundations is how we're translating the word hashatot, i.e. the intentions of Sennacherib are destroyed because intentions have a very similar word, shatot. And according to the one who says that it is referring to the temple itself, the word hashatot is also clear. As we learned in a Mishna in Tractate Yoma about the practice of Yom Kippur, that there was a stone in the Holy of Holies where where Solomon's temple was built. So where the Holy of Holies sat, right, where the Ark of the Covenant was stored in the inner sanctuary of the Holy Temple, that there was a stone under the Ark in the ground from the days of the early prophets, David and Samuel, who laid the groundwork for the construction of the temple, and this stone was called the foundation, sometimes called the foundation stone, and that's Shetiyah in Hebrew. Now, the foundation stone is actually understood by many Jewish sources to be the stone that is, to this day, housed by a building called the Dome of the Rock that is on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. But this stone, this was also the place where Abraham brought Isaac on Mount Moriah in the story of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. That happened on the foundation stone. This was the location where Jacob slept when he left his father's home, and he had the dream, Jacob's ladder going up, the angels going up and down from heaven. That happened at the foundation stone. And I believe Adam and Eve were even there at the foundation stone. Okay, let's keep going. But according to the one who says that the reference is not to the intentions of the righteous or to the holy temple itself built around the foundation stone, but rather that this refers to Hezekiah and his followers. So where do we find that those righteous people are referred to as shatot? And the Gemara answers, as it is written, he raises up the poor out of the dust. He lifts up the needy from the dunghill to make them sit with princes and inherit the throne of glory. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and he has set, vayashet, the world upon them. From 1 Samuel 2:8. Since the righteous are considered the foundations of the world, right? That the world only exists because there are righteous people in it. If all the humans went wicked, then God would say, enough with this world, enough with the humans, enough. We're going to destroy the whole thing because it's nothing but wickedness. So the world stands on account of the righteous people in it. So they are the foundations of the world. So according to this understanding, the verse is interpreted as a reference to them. And if you wish, say instead that it is derived from here, Isaiah 28:29, wonderful is his counsel and great is his wisdom to Shia. So accordingly, the wise, righteous people, they are called shatot. Now, with regard to the latter verse, Rabbi Hanan says, why is the Torah called tushia? Because it weakens mateshet, right? These are related roots in the Hebrew language, and the strength of a person who engage, because the Torah weakens the strength of a person who engages in its study. Always a challenging teaching. Doesn't the Torah make people stronger? But somehow the Torah makes some people, physically weaker. Yeah, because they're no longer working out, spending 18 hours a day sitting down and learning. Their wisdom is growing exponentially, so they have a different kind of strength, but physically they might become weaker. Alternatively, tushia can be interpreted as an abbreviation, that it was given in secret. Shenitena bechashai. This was done because of the Satan, lest he claim that the Jewish people are not worthy of it. Alternatively, tushia can be interpreted as an abbreviation for amorphous matters like tohu, like the chaos at the beginning of creation, tohu vavohu. Amorphous matters that seem foreign and strange. But nevertheless, the world is founded, meshotat, on them. In other words, we can't really understand exactly how this world works, again, because of what I said earlier. In this world, the righteous suffer very often, the wicked prosper, so we can't really understand how the righteous one is running the world, because we can't see all the clockwork that God is engaging in. But when Mashiach comes, or when we leave this world and we're in the world of souls, then perhaps we'll understand. And Ula says, thought, i.e. concern, being worried, is effective, mo'elet, in disturbing even the study of statements of Torah. As it is stated, he frustrates the thoughts of the crafty so that their hands can perform nothing. Velo tushia. That's Job 5:12. And tushia is a reference to Torah. In other words, somebody who worries about things that he can't figure out anybody, that he has no power over, this is going to disturb his ability to learn Torah and become wiser. And Rabbah says, if people engage in Torah study lishma, meaning for its own sake, right? Torah just in the name of Torah, then worries will not have power over them. As it is stated, there are many devices in a man's heart, but the counsel of the Lord, that shall stand. Proverbs 19:21. So Rabbah interprets this to mean that a counsel, like advice, that has in it the statement of the Lord shall rise forever and cannot be disturbed. Right? So those who trust in the wisdom and the Torah and the teaching of the Lord, they will be serene. And because those statements will stand forever, that's something you can bank on. Okay, new subject. The Mishna teaches that Rabbi Yehuda says, when are all these people, for example, gamblers and those who lend with interest, back to the topic of our Mishnah, these people, when are they disqualified from bearing witness? It is when they have no other occupation than this one, right? Somebody who gambles isn't disqualified from bearing witness, but somebody who makes a living as a professional gambler, he is disqualified from bearing witness in a rabbinic court. So Rabbi Abahu says that Rabbi Elazar says the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Abahu says that Rabbi Elazar says all of these require a proclamation in the court. In other words, one is disqualified only if it is proclaimed in court that he was found guilty of this behavior. Just because you heard that somebody's a professional gambler doesn't mean that it's true, and therefore he's not yet disqualified from bearing witness in a Beis Din. It would have to be established in a Beis Din that this person is a professional gambler before he becomes disqualified from giving testimony. Now, with regard to a shepherd who is also disqualified from bearing witness, as we discussed 2 days ago, because at this period in history, shepherds were often wont to let their animals graze in land that was not theirs, which is stealing. And since so many shepherds were doing that, they had this attribute of thievery about them. And therefore, until proven otherwise, a shepherd is disqualified from bearing witness. So sad, because who else was a shepherd? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all of the sons of Jacob, King David, Moses. A lot of famous righteous people were shepherds. But later in history, not such a reputable profession. Okay, so what about them? So with regard to a shepherd who is also disqualified from bearing witness, Rav Acha and Ravina disagree. One says that he requires a proclamation that he is disqualified due to his being a shepherd, and one says that he does not require proclamation and is disqualified automatically. And the Gemara asks, well, granted, according to the one who says that he does not require proclamation, this is what Rav Yehuda means when he says that Rav says that an ordinary shepherd is disqualified, i.e. he does not require a specific proclamation in court to disqualify him from giving testimony. But according to the one who says that a shepherd requires the proclamation of a court to disqualify him, so what is meant by the statement that an ordinary shepherd is disqualified? And the Gemara answers, it means that in an ordinary case, the court proclaims about him that he is disqualified for having engaged in shepherding. If the court discovers that he regularly engages in this trade, it proclaims immediately that he is disqualified, and the court does not need to prove that he shepherds his flock in the fields of others, which is the specific behavior that renders him disqualified. And just in passing, I'll mention, I heard a very interesting podcast, is Mark Zuckerberg on Joe Rogan, right? And what they were talking about specifically is, that he's kind of adjusting his policies. And it was just interesting from the point of view of people who own a social media platform that they're balancing two values, right? On the one hand, you don't want people who are, white supremacists, racists, terrorists, drug dealers, traffickers, sex traffickers, etc. You don't want them to be able to use the platform to somehow further their criminal activity. On the other hand, you don't want innocent people who are not doing anything like that, but who might be using language or posting about, matters or even news stories that somehow the algorithm would read them as possible criminals and then, disconnect their account or censor what they put out there. So the algorithm, you can't, there's not enough people in the world to monitor the posts of the 3 billion people who are on Facebook. So they have to use, AI and machine learning and algorithms. And the question becomes, what level of confidence does the algorithm have to have that it has identified a criminal in order to discontinue, to suspend the account of that criminal? Is it 80%, 90%, 99%? If you raise it high because you don't want to censor innocent people, then a lot of the actual criminals are going to be able to conduct their activity. If you lower that confidence level so that just more of a strong suspicion on the count of the algorithm is enough to suspend the account, you're going to eliminate a lot of that criminal activity, but you're also going to censor many innocent people. So that's what they're trying to balance out. And likewise here, if you know that a lot of shepherds are acting in this criminal manner, so you're going to say, well, we're going to just ban all shepherds from giving testimony. Well, that's going to create a lot of problems when somebody needs a shepherd to be his witness in order to get a matter proven in court, right? But if you say, well, we don't want to do that, so we're only going to, examine them and make sure that this criminal activity is actually going on, we're going to ignore the fact that most shepherds are acting this way, then maybe a lot of actual witnesses who shouldn't be trusted are going to be allowed to testify in court. Again, it's that balancing of priorities. Now the Gemara recounts, with regard to a certain deed of gift on which the names of 2 robbers were signed, Rav Papa Bar Shmuel thought to deem it valid despite the identity of the witnesses, as the court did not proclaim about them that they had been disqualified. Well, he thought he had strong suspicion that they were robbers, but it hadn't been announced by a court, it hadn't been proven in a court by the testimony of other witnesses that these guys are robbers, so he's not going to disqualify the document on which their signatures appear. So Rava said to him, although we require proclamation in order to disqualify a robber from bearing witness, this is only with regard to a robber who is guilty of stealing by rabbinic law. With regard to a robber who is guilty of stealing by Torah law, do we require a proclamation? No, he is disqualified automatically. Now, the Gemara states a mnemonic for the following statements with regard to the disqualification from testifying. something, and forbidden sexual relations, and a thief. This would help you remember if you were memorizing the Talmud. Rav Nachman says, those who eat something else. This is a euphemism for pork. They are disqualified from bearing witness. Are we saying that any Jew who eats a ham sandwich can no longer testify in front of a Beis Din? No. This is referring to those who accept charity from Gentiles, thereby causing a desecration of God's name. They are tantamount to wicked people guilty of monetary transgressions, as they are willing to desecrate God's name for monetary gain. Are we saying that any Jew who's who's having a really tough time in his life and accepts charity from non-Jews is going to be, deemed a desecration of God's name, who can no longer testify in court? No. That was just the first view. The Gemara comments, this statement applies with regard to taking charity from Gentiles in public, befar chesia. But if one takes it in private, he is not disqualified. In the time and place that we're talking about, the Jewish community was very unified and tight. So if somebody says, I need help, the community's not taking care of me, that would be like slandering the whole Jewish community, because he should have been taken care of by the Jewish community. So if he's saying that, it's like actually probably a purposeful attempt to slander the Jewish community that he wants to separate himself from. That kind of situation is not present today. But if one and even if he takes it in public, we said that he is disqualified only in a case where he can sustain himself by accepting charity from Gentiles in private. And despite this, he disgraces himself, and some would say disgraces the community, by taking it in public. But if he cannot support himself in any other manner, then he is not disqualified, as it is his livelihood. Rav Nachman says, one who, due to a rumor, is suspected of engaging in forbidden sexual relations is fit to bear witness. So, for example, somebody who commits incest, he's fit to bear witness. Rav Sheshet said to him, answer me, my master. The law is that one who is rumored to have engaged in forbidden sexual intercourse, like rape or incest, he receives 40 lashes on his shoulders. And yet you say he is fit to bear witness? And Rava said, and Rav Nachman concedes that he is disqualified with regard to testimony about the status of a married woman, as he is clearly under suspicion with regard to this matter. He won't be accepted to give testimony that he saw a certain married Jewish woman commit adultery. Ravina says, and some say that Rav Papa says, we said that he is disqualified only with regard to testimony that removes a woman from her status as a married woman, that he saw her commit adultery. But with regard to testimony that establishes her in that status, we have no problem with it. In other words, if somebody accuses a woman of committing adultery, and this guy says, no, I saw her, and she was not at that location where you're accusing her of committing adultery. She was in such and such a place, and she's good. Then we would accept his testimony, even though he's suspected of himself of engaging in forbidden sexual relations. And the Gemara asks, isn't that obvious? Why should he be suspected of lying in order to save the reputation of this woman? And the Gemara answers, lest you say that if he wants her for himself, this situation, i.e. that she's married to another person, is actually preferable to him. As it is written, stolen waters are sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant, i.e. that the forbidden is more pleasant than the permitted. Rav Papa teaches us that this is not the case, as the way that the woman is now, being unmarried, she is more available to him. He therefore is not motivated to testify falsely that she is married. Okay, so not even about that she committed adultery, but rather just to establish, is she a married woman or not? And he's saying, no, she's married. I saw them at the wedding. I saw that wedding. She's a married woman. We would accept his testimony for that. And Rav Nachman says, a thief of Nisan and a thief of Tishrei. So Nisan, the month in which Passover in the spring, and Tishrei, the month of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in the fall, i.e. one who steals during the harvest seasons, He is not called a thief and is therefore not disqualified from bearing witness. So what are we talking about? This is somebody who's only going to steal during the spring and fall harvests. Who is that? This statement applies specifically with regard to a tenant farmer. And it is a situation where he took a small amount, and in a case where it was an item whose work was completed, i.e. that needed no further processing, and since the produce was sufficiently processed, the tenant may assume that he deserves additional pay for any further labor and justify taking a small amount of the produce for his effort. Consequently, his theft is not willful. He wasn't trying to steal. He just thought that he was entitled to more than perhaps he was entitled to. That's not a thief. I mean, in this context. The Gemara recounts, an incident occurred with the tenant farmers of Rav Zevid. One stole a kav of barley, and Rav Zevid disqualified him from bearing witness. And one stole a cluster of dates, and he disqualified him. And the reason for the disqualification is that the quantity of produce that they stole is not considered a small amount. And the Gemara relates, there were these grave diggers who buried a person on the first day of the festival of Shavuos, desecrating the festival. And Rav Papa excommunicated them and then disqualified them from bearing witness. And Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, deemed them fit to bear witness. And Rav Papa said to Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, I see that it is late, so we're going to knock off questions or comments. Please get them in now. Okay, so there were these grave diggers who buried a person on the first day of the festival of Shavuos, desecrating the festival. So Rav Papa excommunicated them, and he disqualified them from bearing witness. And Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, disagreed and said, no, they are fit to bear witness. So Rav Papa said to Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, but aren't they wicked people, as they violated a Torah prohibition? And Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, answered him, they assumed that they were doing a mitzvah, as they were burying the dead. And Rav Papa asked, but didn't I excommunicate them for this? And nevertheless, they continued to bury people on Yom Tov, on the festival, on the holiday. And Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, answered, they assumed we were not excommunicated for doing something wrong. Rather, since the mitzvah of burying the dead involved desecrating the festival, the sages are achieving atonement for us, although our behavior was appropriate. We're suffering for the good deed that we did, and this actually is going to atone for other things that we may have done wrong. In other words, the suffering of the righteous is an atonement for them. That's a teaching we see frequently in the Talmud, and it's something that, when you're going through really tough times, might give you a little bit of comfort, that the suffering we experience in this world is like we're already being punished for some sins that we know or don't know about, but we won't have to spend time in Gehenna after our deaths in order to be refined and purified of those transgressions. Our suffering in this world achieves some of that atonement for us. Okay, some comments. Lucy, during the sabbatical year, people would not give terumah to the priest, so maybe they needed some new way to get income to feed their families. And maybe that is why it was not surprising to see a priest work Gentile fields during the sabbatical year. Very good insight. I hadn't thought of that. Thank you, Lucy. Sharon, how can there be terumah in the sabbatical year? And why is there terumah when the temple is no longer at the time of this Gemara? So I think that they were still separating Meiser and terumah even after the temple was destroyed, at least for a while. As to why there might still be terumah to separate during the sabbatical year, no, they're not farming, they're not harvesting. But they might have separated terumah the previous year. And so it's like they have a pile of terumah, but they haven't had an opportunity to give it to a priest yet. And maybe they're doing that during the sabbatical year. That's what comes to mind for me, but I'm not sure. Yosef, when we lived in Israel, we had to take terumah and meiser from all fruits and produce, right? See, righteous people are even doing it today. Depending on where you bought it. Usually the Rabbanut meaning the sort of rabbinic authority of Israel, took care of it for all the supermarkets, shuks with a hechsher. In other words, stores that had the hechsher, that this is where, religious people can shop because they can trust that Meiser has been taken. Now, Meiser in modern times, tithing, is not like it was in ancient times. It's just a little bit is separated out so that we can remain connected to the commandment of separating tithes. But we don't, take 2% and give it to Kohanim, and the next 10% and give it to the Levium, and another 10% to give to the poor. It's much smaller amounts are taken. That's how tithing is done now in this, in our exile and in this period long after the temple was destroyed. But there are lots of people who will only eat, produce from the land of Israel that has gone through that process. Otherwise, they won't touch it. But if you bought it from a farm or roadside stands or a store without a hechsher, right, without this seal of approval from the rabbinic authority in Israel, then you had to separate the proper amount for yourself, recite the formula, and transfer that holiness onto a coin. And when the coin was full, you threw it in the ocean. Since we don't know what else we could do with it, you have to just get rid of it. And that's why we only do a small amount. And then the produce that you separated had to be wrapped and set aside for a few days until you could throw that out. And Jonathan says, there is another question about Gabriel, right? The angel Gabriel. That Gabriel is considered to be the one that God sent to destroy Jerusalem. Correct. Right? Gabriel is associated with Gevura. Right? Michael, the angel named Michael, whose name is God. That's what Michael means, whose name is God. He's associated with chesed, loving kindness, and the attribute of mercy. And Gabriel is associated with Gevura, judgment, right? Strict justice. And those two balance each other out. And we always hope that God's attribute of mercy will dominate his attribute of justice, strict justice. But eventually God gets fed up and then exacts justice in the world. And so Gabriel is the angel who was sent to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and Gabriel is the one who was sent to destroy the temples when Jerusalem fell at the end of the first and second temple periods. Says Jonathan, in Kabbalah, Gabriel is associated with Yesod, not Gevura, but Yesod, foundation, conceiving. A different sephira in the Eitz Chaim, the tree, the Kabbalistic tree of the attributes of God. And maybe it is because it wasn't time. And Gabriel was there to help the people atone and help build a more righteous society. But we have to believe in it in order to make it happen. Beautiful. And Yosef, different Yosef, says, these questions that we are studying now in Sanhedrin is what prompted and drew me to Daf Yomi, our daily class in Talmud, to begin with. My initial inquiry was the topic of justice within Judaism as it relates to corrupt or erroneous priesthood and kings and how it was dealt with Talmudically. And then here we are. And finally, Ilanit, the first yard site of the founder of the Silver Spring Jewish Center, and my first chance to participate in the prayer after the study of Mishna for the deceased, learning tonight in the merit of Harav Chaim Herzl Krantz. May his memory be for a blessing. The founder of SSJC in Maryland. He would have loved to know about our class together. May his memory always be for a blessing. Thank you, everybody. Great to be learning with you. And reminder, our next class, because I'm away this week in Miami, our next class is next Saturday night. When God willing, I'll be back in LA, and we can continue on to page 27 here in Tractate Sanhedrin. All the best.